Okay, this is forensic interviewing of children. Today is April 21st, 2014. Hopefully everyone had a great Easter Sunday yesterday. I posted Learning Project 4 within Learning Module 8, and I just want to focus on that for a little while for you guys in class, and as well as my students who are online as well. Learning Project 4 is about reliability analysis. And one of the things that I want you to take away from this class is having appreciation of what makes a credible child interview. In other words, if you had a transcript or an audio recording or a video recording, as we often do when interviews are conducted at child advocacy centers, is there a way we can size up the credibility or believability of a child interview? The courts require this in certain cases, not so much in the family court, but in the criminal courts. But nevertheless, as a worker and as a DAG representing the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, that DAG will have to make an argument to the court that the interview with the child and the child's report of molestation or physical abuse, for that matter, is believable. What are the kinds of things we would look for in determining whether the child's account is reliable or not? One of the things that we were chatting about before we began class, or at least I mentioned it, was I focused throughout this course mostly on sexual abuse. And the reason is we want to learn about forensic interviewing. We want to learn about interviewing a child in a way that is defensible in a legal proceeding. That's what forensic means, right? I think one of the things I asked you way back when was, tell me what the definition of forensic means. And generally speaking, forensic means relating to a legal proceeding. So the end game here is to learn how to talk to kids in a way that develops information that's courtroom worthy or defensible in some legal proceeding, whether it be family court, civil court, or the criminal courts. And we are, throughout this course, learning about effective strategies to talk to children in a neutral and an objective way to get the highest quality information and the most information from children so that we can present it in a legal proceeding, typically a courtroom. Well, one of the things that I want to leave you with as we begin to wind down here is how do we size up a child's complete statement for believability or credibility? Somebody's going to have to make that argument one day. Certainly we make that judgment. Child protection workers make that judgment when we interview a child, because you're going to take the next step. Obviously, if you feel that this child is not being credible or isn't believable, or there's something that makes us skeptical of what they're reporting to us, that's a case where we might not take action. We're certainly not going to remove a child, and we're certainly not going to impose conditions on parents if we don't believe that the child's statements are credible or not. So what kinds of things can we look for in a child's narrative about past abuse that might convince us that what they're reporting is credible or believable? And we call that reliability analysis. And sometimes it's all we have to go on is the child's statement. We try to avoid that, but as I said earlier before we began the recording, that physical abuse cases, you have injuries, you have medical science, you have a history provided by the caregiver and sometimes the child that we can compare with medical science. You have a spiral fracture of the femur, and the parent says, I dropped the child out of my arms from about 4 feet onto a shag carpet. That doesn't make sense, right? So, we have a little bit of an advantage there. We have medical science on our side. We have x-rays and MRIs. We have a lot of different evidentiary strategies to try to corroborate and prove that there was physical maltreatment. When it comes to sexual abuse, as we all know, there's very rarely evidence, very rarely physical evidence. Often it's only the words of the child. So I want to talk a little bit about how to size up, how to view a child's statement for reliability. Now, when you have a full video of it, it's a lot easier than if some guidance counselor is telling you from her memory what the child said at the school. We can do that reliability analysis on what that guidance counselor reports, but it's certainly not as easy to apply reliability analysis when it's somebody's recollection we're relying upon, because no one has a verbatim recollection of what a child said. And often it's what the exact words are that will lead us in one direction or another. So your Learning Project 4 is on the big board now. And the first element of it is the video. That is a edited video in a sexual abuse case that's about 20 minutes. And I cut parts of it out so that you didn't have to watch an hour and 10 minutes of it. And it's about sexual abuse. I forget who the accused is. It's been a while since I had edited this for a different purpose. The point is, you got your video of the child's report, what they say happened to them, what kind of sexual abuse was perpetrated upon them. And then you have the factors, which I put on a chart for everyone, and that's the next thing in Learning Project 4, and I'm looking at it on Canvas. I'm bringing up the chart, and there's the elements that you need to look for, and I'll address them quickly in a moment, because I did a PowerPoint video for you with some degree of detail, but I still will go over them in class now very quickly. You still have to watch the PowerPoint, and you can see there's a chart there. Now that chart is made up of these two cases. I'm going to jump ahead. Well, here's the tutorial. Next you have a video, and that's me talking about the factors like I'm going to do in a moment in class. Display of motion, videotape, statement overheard, those things. If you go down, you'll see there's a tutorial where Del Russo talks in some degree of detail about all that stuff up there. So where did I get that stuff from? Where did I get these reliability factors? From those two cases, Idaho versus Wright and State versus Delgado. Okay, that's why I reproduced it within the Learning Project. I reproduced it in Learning Module 8, and I gave it to you as an assignment in Learning Module 7. And Idaho versus Wright gets a little thick. It's a United States Supreme Court case, and it's really about hearsay. It's about a case in Idaho where the child makes a statement, and the issue is whether that statement is admissible as a hearsay exception. And I'm not going to get into all that, what hearsay is and why they were fighting about it throughout the courts of Idaho and eventually before the United States Supreme Court, except to say that if the Attorney General in Idaho wanted to get the child's statement in before the jury in the Wright case, they had to convince the judge in Idaho that the statement by the child was trustworthy or reliable. I call it reliability analysis. You can call this trustworthy analysis. Not that it was 100% true, but it was probably true. Might have been false, but probably true. You know, a probable cause. The statement must have been shown to be trustworthy. And when you read the Idaho versus Wright case, you'll see the court discuss some of the factors that I offer up to you in the reliability analysis. Okay? With greater specificity, Delgado, which is a New Jersey case, addresses very similar issues. In State of New Jersey versus Delgado, the court offers to us, the field workers, the prosecutors and CPS workers and cops working in the trenches, the Supreme Court of New Jersey offers up factors to look for in determining whether the child's statement is trustworthy or not, whether it's believable. Okay? So from those two cases, which I want you to read also, I was able to make this chart. When you're studying for the midterm, the final exam, you can just go to the chart. Okay? But as you're doing your assignments, I want you to read the cases and look at the chart. Once you're done reading the cases, as you're preparing for the final exam, just get to know the chart. The chart will help you. So, as I say in the detailed instructions below, and read them well, this is for 8 points. Like I said for my on-campus class, nearly all of you are in A territory right now, so let's not blow it. Follow the instructions, read them, and it pretty much says what I just said now. But I want you to cite the reliability factors in your conclusion. And what I mean by that is you're going to watch the video. Did that answer your question? We're going to watch the video of the child being interviewed. There's an actual video. And then you're going to apply reliability analysis. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but what you're going to do is look for things that the child says, behaviors of the child that suggest that it's a credible interview, it's a believable or trustworthy interview. And if you find one, you should find a few. If you find one, you need to cite what it is. Okay? I give you an example here. At this paragraph, for this learning project, I'll read it to you. You will watch the entire video. You'll then write a paper describing why you believe the child's statements are believable. If you conclude that the child is believable, then identify with specificity what it is about the child's interview, including her language, behavior, and/or emotions that support your conclusion. For example, if you see evidence in the child's narrative based upon the reliability factors, which we'll discuss in some detail, and you have a PowerPoint narrated that you're going to watch, you must cite them in support of your conclusion. Anything that you identify that suggests the child's statements are believable and trustworthy can be used to support your conclusions. And it doesn't matter whether it's on that chart. If you see something that that child says, or some behavior that that child engages in that says to you, man, that makes sense. You know what? That kid seems believable. Articulate what it is. It may not even be on that chart. Okay? So you can even go off the chart. The chart isn't the be-all and end-all. But if you do that, here's what you need to do. You must provide the timestamp on the video so I can look it up. Okay? That's what it says here. For example, one of the things I'll tell you about is where the child corrects the interviewer. That is a reliability factor. Kids who do that are more likely to be telling the truth than kids who don't correct the interviewer. And it's not that kids who don't correct the interviewer are bad or liars. They could still be very truthful. But if you find a kid who corrects the interviewer, that's a nice thing to hone in on. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So let's say you watch the video and you see that the child corrects the interviewer. There's a reliability factor. Well, you're going to write something like this down in your paper. The interviewer asked the child, Marissa, how it felt on her body when Grandpa put his fingers in her mouth. At 27:42 of the video. When you play back the YouTube video, there's a running time counter. It starts at 0, and anytime you pause it, you'll see where it is. 1 minute, 42 seconds, 7 minutes and 32 seconds, right? So I want to know where the child corrects the interviewer. Because if you're telling me the child corrected the interviewer, I want to see it. I'm going to go to 27:42, and I want to see what the child does. And I agree with you, disagree with you, whatever. It will help me grade the paper. So the way you would express that in your paper is the interviewer asked the child, or something like this. The interviewer asked the child, Marissa, how it felt on her body when Grandpa put his fingers in her mouth at 27:42 on the video. The child corrects the interviewer by saying, quote, Grandpa never put his fingers in my mouth. He put them on my butt, unquote. The fact that the child corrected the interviewer adds to the credibility of her statement because it rebuts any assertion that the interviewer was leading the child or being overly suggestible. So let's focus on that one now. I'll skip it in the reliability factors. When kids correct the interviewer, that's an opportunity for us to suggest or argue to the judge, to the DAG, to whoever it is we want to convince that this child's believable. We can argue that this child, I know the interviewer asked some suggestive questions, and suggestive questions are frowned upon. But just because an interviewer asks suggestive questions doesn't mean the child is adopting what the interview says, or that the interview's bad, or the child's lying, or the child got it wrong. Okay? Just because an interview asks a few leading questions doesn't corrupt the whole interview. In fact, this child corrects the interviewer. So if the interviewer, go ahead.
It corroborates the statement.
Yeah. So, and if one of the arguments is the child is just saying what we want her to say, or, if we saying, Grandpa took you in his shed, right? Yeah. If the child is simply agreeing with us, that's one thing. But this is an example where we can show that the child is not simply agreeing with the interviewer. Where the interviewer messed up, the child corrected the interviewer. So that in a way rebuts suggestibility, right? The argument against suggestibility is that the child is adopting what the interviewer suggests, right? And we worry about that. And it's hard to ask a child questions without once in a while asking a suggestive question. There's no such thing as a perfect interview. There's going to be suggestive questions. I don't care who you are, how great an interviewer you are. That doesn't destroy the interview. Far from it. It's nice, though, if in that interview at some point the child corrects the interviewer, then we could say, aha, this is good evidence that this child is not adopting whatever the interviewer throws out there. When the interviewer got something wrong, the child corrected it. So we can argue, I think persuasively, that despite the fact that there were some suggestive or leading questions, this child is not embracing whatever we say. This child's paying attention. This child's following the ground rules, right? This child is paying attention to what the questions are and not merely agreeing with whatever the interviewer says. So that's one example. That's one example of a reliability factor. And what I'm doing here in the example section is showing you how I want it written in your paper. And it's not a paper, and it's 2 to 3 pages, for lack of a better description, in your learning project. So let's look at other reliability factors. Okay? And again, there's a full PowerPoint I want you to watch on this because I'm not going to go into as much detail here. But again, idiosyncratic details, gestures, or acting out events. Idiosyncratic means oddball in a way, unusual details, okay? Unusual details are gestures. So if the child describes ejaculation, if the child describes semen in some way, if the child describes fellatio or oral sex upon a man in a way that's odd and beyond the child's age range, I say in my narrated PowerPoint, this isn't that effective when the kid is a teenager. You know, because teenagers, especially in 2014, have a pretty good sense of human sexuality. Not all of them, but many of them. So you could still argue it, but it's not going to be as impactful. Aha, the 16-year-old knew what it meant to come. And she described semen coming out of his penis. That's only going to get you so far in a reliability analysis with a teenager. But if it's an 8-year-old, that's powerful stuff, right? Idiosyncratic detail. There's lots of idiosyncratic details about human sexuality. I can't even predict what they may be. You may spot one that I missed. I may spot one that you missed. But if there's something in the manner in which the child describes things, okay? There's a video, I don't know if I have it here. When I teach finding words, I talk about this, anatomical dolls. I may even have the video. We're going to talk either this week or next week about anatomical dolls, where the girl says, she does this with the dolls. That was a boy, I think. The boy demonstrates with the dolls fellatio. He had to fillet an older boy. I think he was a teenager. And when he shows it with the dolls, he's going, and then he did this, and then he pulled down his pants, and he put his wiener in my mouth. And then he did this, and he took the molester doll, and he put the molester doll's hand behind the victim's doll's head, and pushed the head up and down on the penis. That, to me, is an idiosyncratic detail of fellatio. Now, does that happen in every act of oral sex upon a male? No. But it happens in enough of them if you to say, listen, a kid wouldn't know that a grown-up or an older kid would guide his head up and down on the penis. That's an oddball detail that I would point to that suggests that the kid learned this from having lived it, rather than somebody suggested it to him or he saw it on, late night HBO or something, So oddball details about human sexuality can be very powerful. Doesn't have to be what they say, of course, what they say. And again, the mechanics of human sexuality that are unknown to most little kids are a lot. What, you okay? Give her 2 hands there. There you go. No, that's okay. I don't mean to embarrass you. So when kids give those kind of oddball or idiosyncratic details, or even they act it out or they gesture in a way, a child says, you got 2 kids, right? You say, Uncle Mikey took my hand and put it on his wiener. What happened next? And he made me touch his wiener. What did he do? He put my hand on his wiener. Show me what he did. Maybe you get the dolls out, or show me what he did. And the kid goes, he put it on his wiener. Okay, that's kid A. The child could be perfectly telling the truth, right? Kid B says he put it on his wiener, and then, right? So what I'm doing is, for the record, a masturbatory gesture. I'm moving my hand back and forth in a masturbatory gesture. The kid who does what I just did, moving my hand back and forth, because we're grown-ups and we know about human sexuality, we know that that's a common way to achieve arousal on the male genitalia. So the 8-year-old who does that probably lived it, right? How do you come up with that oddball detail when you're 7 or 6 or 8? You don't, unless somebody did it to you, right? So that's another idiosyncratic detail. That's not about what he said, although what he said or she said is powerful. And then sticky stuff came out, or then he got a rag and cleaned his wiener, and then, or his wiener was droopy, and then his wiener changed. It got different. It stood up or whatever. Male erection. A change in the male penis that the child spontaneously discloses in an interview is an idiosyncratic detail. Kids want to know about that, right? So what they say and what they do, that's beyond their age. Like I said, when they get to be teens, it's not so powerful, right? But when they're little kids, it can be powerful. And that dovetails into the second one, developmentally unusual sexual knowledge, right? That's pretty much the same thing. Display of emotion. Well, you know what? I don't like to emphasize this too much because judges and courts and juries focus too much on display of emotion. But if you have a kid who gets real sad when they're talking, then Grandpa Bob made me put my hand on his wiener and puts his head down, you're going to go, all right, got a display of emotion, right? Puts his eyes down, he finds it difficult to talk about, he's sad and crying. We can argue that that display of emotion is consistent with what we would expect of a child who's traumatized. But we experts in the field know what? What do we know? That if you really got into it, that we'll say it, and we'll argue it to judges and juries. But what do we know about kids by the time they get to us and we interview them, or the lives, sadly, sometimes they live in, where that is, probably, sadly, not the worst thing that happened to them in the past 6 months? That what about children's emotions? Do they always act like I just described when describing human sexuality?
Visually, necessarily like that.
They're not necessarily going to show the kind of emotion that regular people expect them to show, right? Sometimes they're flat. Sometimes they may giggle or inappropriately. Sometimes they may be all that and more in a bag of chips. Yeah, so put my hand on his wiener. Whatever, There's a wide variety of emotions, and the more traumatized the kid is, generally speaking, the more possible it is for them to be very flat and not very emotional. When the courts wrote this down, they are offering that to us as a reliability indicator consistent with the general belief, the layperson's belief, that sexual assault victims are very emotional about what they say and what happened to them, and they're just not. But if the kid happens to be emotional, well, then you go, the kid's emotional. That doesn't mean we don't use it as an argument. Right. And if some kid is doing what I'm doing, and for the record, see, when you become a lawyer, you always say, for the record, lawyers say that it's because I know that my online class can't see what I'm doing. So for the record, I'm looking down at my shoes, and you can hear me, and then he made me touch his wiener, and I'm looking at my shoes, and I'm reaching out like I'm touching a wiener. The point is that child is demonstrating emotion, and that is an emotion that is expected when a child is talking about a traumatic event. If you got that in the case, you argue that. You say, this is believable because the child corrected the interviewer. The child knew these oddball details that 8-year-olds typically don't know, right? The child became very sad. She was looking at her feet. She began to cry when describing the sexual acts. Okay? If the statement was video recorded, courts have found that that's better, because we can see, the judge can see it, the jury can see it. Now, that's not something about the kid or the manner in which the kid said it, or the emotions of the child. That's just the fact that everybody can see it and judge for themselves. So it's nicer. Courts are more likely to find that the statement of the child is reliable if they can look at it as well. So that's nice to have a statement that's video recorded. So that ought to be the first one of all of your reliability analysis, because inherently that's in your case, because I'm giving you a video. So check that one off. Ours is video recorded. The judge can look at it. And this is similar. If its statement was overheard, imagine if it wasn't video recorded, and that's why the court offers statement overheard. Imagine it's a case where the 8-year-old girl goes to one of the social workers at her middle school, or even the middle school, elementary school, and she's crying and she wants to talk to Mrs. B because Mrs. B's the best, and Mrs. B calls in her office and the school nurse is there because that's what the school does, although I teach schools and institutions not to do that, but she calls the school nurse in. So the nurse is there, Mrs. B is there, and the child is saying what happened with Grandpapa. Well, if Mrs. B gives us a narrative about what the kid said and how the kid said it, she said that her grandfather comes in her room at night and then he makes her touch his penis and she was moving her hand back and forth in a masturbatory fashion. And then we bring in the nurse, and she corroborates that. That's basically what we're talking about here. It's more reliable if two people have a recollection of what the child said than one person. Because the court's concerned about whether the narrative that we're analyzing is what the child did and said. That's why video recording makes the court very happy. But if if there's no video recording and it happened at the school, let's say, before child protection or the police or the prosecutor got there, if it was overheard by a third party, courts have found that to be a reliability factor and something they will focus on as evidence that the statement's trustworthy. If the interviewer uses open-ended, neutral questions, if the interviewer doesn't use a lot of leading or suggestive questions, that's a good thing. I would argue, and I made this argument many times to courts. You see, we try to get that video admitted in evidence. Now, Professor Freed talks about this exception to the hearsay rule. Did he talk about hearsay at all yet with you guys? Mm-hmm. He did. And he told you about what we call the tender years exception, kids under 12. It's a statement about sexual abuse perpetrated on the child that you can sometimes get those statements in before the court, jury, or judge. Yeah. So, but in order to get them in, we have to show that that statement's trustworthy. And that's what Freed's talking about with that tender years exception. So I've made this argument many, many times, as he has, in trying to get the videos in before the judge or the jury, typically before both. One of the things I might say here is, Judge, the court has watched the entire interview. Mr. Bickert, the defendant's attorney, watched it, and I did as well. And I'll tell you something, Judge. The child does most of the talking, and Giselle, the interviewer, asked mostly open-ended questions. There were very few leading or suggestive questions in this case here. And that's one of the things I want Your Honor to focus on when you go back in your chambers and decide whether this video is trustworthy or not. The fact that most of the questions were neutral. They were open-ended and they were not suggestible. Sure, a couple times Ms. Enriquez asks this question or that question, but the vast majority of questions were proper and neutral. And the account of what happened to that child came from the words of the child, not from Ms. Enriquez. That's something that you would argue. On the other hand, if you watch the video and Enriquez is going, then Grandpa put his fingers in your mouth. No, he didn't. They put him in your butt. Isn't that true? If that's the kind of interview that we're all watching, well, then you don't have proper questioning and you can't make the argument I just made. I told you about the child disagreeing or agreeing with the interviewer. That is powerful evidence to rebut the assertion or the argument from the side that says the child's interview isn't reliable or that it is not trustworthy because the child was misled by the interviewer. The interviewer asked all kinds of leading questions, Judge. Well, Judge, I have to agree there were a lot of leading questions. We wish there weren't. But I'll tell you this, Judge. There were a couple of times on that video, I saw it at 2742, and when Your Honor goes in the chambers, if you look at 4144, you'll see little Marissa corrects the interviewer. Not once, but twice. And what that says, Judge, is even though Ms. Enriquez asked a lot of leading questions, and we wish she didn't, the child was not adopting them simply because Ms. Enriquez was suggesting them. It's not her fault that we messed up and we asked too many leading questions. Thankfully, that child corrected Ms. Enriquez, not once, but twice. And what I'm learning from that, Judge, and I asked this court to take away, is that child was not buying whatever Ms. Enriquez was offering. When Enriquez got it wrong, the child told her, you got it wrong. So this is not a suggestibility issue here. Okay? That's the child disagrees or corrects. Age-appropriate terminology. This is where we talked about age-inappropriate terminology, where the child, not so much inappropriate terminology, but idiosyncratic terminology, where the child talks about ejaculation or erection or engages in behaviors, pushing the head up and down, masturbatory, moving their hands in a masturbatory motion, or whatever else one might see that is consistent with human sexuality and beyond the age range of the child. This is age-appropriate terminology. So we expect the child not to say, and then Grandpa Pa took my hand in a masturbatory manner and pulled on his dick. If that's what the child says, you better have an explanation why she's talking like that. That could happen once in a while, but very rarely. And if it does happen in a case where the child's telling the truth, how can we explain that? Think about some theory about why you might have a kid talk like that, yet still be telling the truth.
Because she's overheard somebody else explain it.
Exactly. Well, you had something?
I would say they're really mature.
Well, that could be too. They could be really mature or very precocious. And precocious means advanced beyond their years. But let's say she's 6.
For some.
You might get that if you have multiple interviews of the child. Why?
Somebody retained it.
Somebody used that terminology. What'd you say, Peggy?
No, she's retaining the information.
Retaining the information. Somebody may use that terminology. She heard it before from us, from the police and child protection. And that may have happened, but you need to be able to argue that. You need to be able to say, listen, the child uses language that's not appropriate for her age, but here's why. The problem is, in the absence of an explanation, that you put on the side of the ledger that, you know what, I don't have a lot of confidence this is true. This is a kid who, may have heard it on a movie or got it from someone else. You got an issue here no matter what. On the other hand, I'm offering this to you in a positive way. Age-appropriate terminology. There's a video I have with the dolls, too. I have to find them. I may be able to get them on the break or for next class. What's up? Oh. I thought I did something funny. The girl goes on the doll interview, when I talk about age-appropriate terminology, she says, and then he came in my room and he pulled up my nightgown, and she's showing with the dolls. And she said, then he got on me, and it was something hard. I don't know what it was. It was something hard. And he was kind of jumping on me. I don't know what, jumping. And he was kissing my face. I'll show you this video. It's pretty compelling. For a variety of reasons. But does that sound like the way an 8 or 9-year-old might characterize it? Confusion about what was poking her. Confusion about he was jumping on me. Just couldn't really fathom what the hell that was all about. He's like jumping on me. And the interviewer, this was Rachel. Rachel's going, tell me more about that. What he's doing. I don't know. And then she took the bot. Now, when you got the dolls, you get good idiosyncratic detail. That's why I'm a big fan of the dolls. She's going, well, he was kind of jumping on me, and she's making the doll like pump on her in a sexual way, which would be an idiosyncratic detail expressed with age-appropriate terminology, right? And there could be a lot of ways that the child expresses herself that's age-appropriate that you will hone in on in a way to say this child's account is reliable or trustworthy. Spontaneity. Now, you're not going to get a lot of spontaneity in a forensic interview like I'm offering you, with the child's interviewed at its center. You can, but a different kind of spontaneity I'll describe to you in a moment. You're going to get more spontaneity when you're interviewing the aunt or the mom or the guidance counselor or some third party and the account that the child gave was not video recorded. Because that's where you get your most spontaneous stuff. For example, a little girl, age 9, is watching a movie about molestation, or there's a molestation issue in some program she's watching on TV with her aunt, and the aunt says to her, what's up, Gabriella? You look sad or something. I don't want to talk about it. What do you mean you don't want to talk about what? What's the matter? What's the matter, honey? Come by. Come by, Aunt Tizzy. Child comes over. Grandpa Michael does that. Does what? What are you talking about? He does that. I don't know what you're talking about, Gabriella. He comes in my room and he jumps on me at night. Okay, you get the picture. Spontaneous, right? Nobody questioned her. Nobody asked her about anything. She offered it up out of the clear blue. That is a pure version of spontaneity. You don't always get that, but I'm giving you the purest version. It can happen anywhere between that, where the aunt goes to, you don't want to go to Grandpa Mike's anymore. Is there a reason why? What's the reason you want to go? How come you get all upset when you go there? Now you might say, well, that's not spontaneous because she didn't. Then the child goes, he jumps on me. He does things to me. Well, that could still be argued that it's spontaneous, but it's not as pure as the one I offered you first, because the aunt is pressing her a little bit about why she gets upset when she goes to Grandpa Mike's. And the opposite of spontaneity is shoving the information down the child's throat, right? She knows Grandpa Mike had a prior in California. Nobody knows in the family. She knows. She's like, Grandpa Mike, did Grandpa Mike take his wiener out? Did he? Did he do it in front of you? Did he make you touch his wiener? Well, that's the purest form of suggestibility, and that would be the opposite of spontaneity. But imagine an interview. You can have spontaneity in the interview. Supposing the child made a disclosure that Grandpa Mike comes in and he peeps in the bathroom, right? And then CPS investigates. You guys go out to the house and you go into the walk-in closet next to the bathroom, and what do you find? Peephole. Now, I recommend you get out your camera, even your own. Even they tell you don't use your phone. Use your phone camera. Take a picture of the damn peephole before he gets to, whatever you got, plaster to fix it. But even then, we've gone into homes and we found the plaster. It's like uneven, and we say, and he covered up the peephole. But anyway, you go in there, it's a peephole case. All right, bring the child in. You do a forensic interview wherever at the Child Advocacy Center. You ask about touches. The child begins to get upset and sad, and she says, Grandpapa, or whoever the peeper is, he came in one night and he put his wiener on my mouth. Well, I would argue that's spontaneous, okay? Even though the interview is about the peeping, and she spontaneously offers us a sexual touch that no one knew about and nobody was, focusing on because it wasn't in the case. Now we ask generally about touches. That's why we ask about touches. Are there touches you like you like? Are there touches you don't like? Because there may be touches that were not offered or not part of the original disclosure that the child may offer during the interview. So even though we may be asking a bunch of questions about the peeping, the sexual touch thing may come up spontaneously in the middle of the interview. So don't be too rigid on spontaneity. Spontaneity means the child offers it without any prompting from the interviewer at all. The child just offers it out of left field. That's spontaneous. Okay? Absence of motive to fabricate. You'll see in the video I give some good examples. But the bottom line is, imagine again, if I give it to you in the context of making the argument, these things make more sense to you. Say, Judge, Gabriella doesn't even know Grandpapa Mike. He lived his whole life in Sicily. She has no relationship with him. He came to visit his sister. And within 24 hours, he's crawling on the floor in her room and he's touching her on her body parts. She don't even know Grandpa Mike. He just came from Sicily. She's got no motive to lie against Uncle Grandpa Mike. There's nothing that could have happened that made her mad at him or upset at him or have an axe to grind or some, grudge against Grandpa Mike. There's no motive to fabricate here. If that's in your case, you can argue that. That's something you would focus on. Absence of motive to fabricate. The sad thing is, with teenager cases, they're going to be a motive to fabricate. There's going to be a motive to fabricate. If you didn't hear it day one, you're going to hear it by the time you get to the fact-finding, or by the time you get to the trial or the pretrial hearings in the criminal courts. So what you do is, if it's a case where law enforcement's involved, then they should know what to do. But if it's a case where the prosecutor's office isn't involved, it's not a significant case for their intake protocol, whatever, and they say, go ahead, feel free to talk to the target, go to the jail, do what you want, go investigate the case. They gave you the green light to talk to the target, the suspect, the Grandpa Mikes of the world. You say to Grandpa Mike, you have a great relationship with Gabriella. Oh, sure. You want Grandpa Mikes of the world to say that Gabriella is the best kid in the whole world, okay? And if it's true, you're going to get him to say that right away. When he gets a lawyer, they're going to look for all kind of bases for her to make a false allegation, okay? They will come up with one, believe me. So you need to get him right away to agree that Gabriella's a good kid. You get along with her well, sure. You don't have any problems with her. She's an 8-year-old kid, even if it's a teen, especially with a teen. You and Daniela get along great, right? In fact, you took Daniela and 2 of her girlfriends down a great adventure this summer. Yeah. She thinks you're her best uncle in the world, right? And you think she's the best niece. Get her to say that Daniela is the greatest kid in the world, and they don't have any problems with one another. Because I am telling you, as sure as I'm sitting here, by the time you get to the fact finding, or the return date on the initial filing, or the criminal court probable cause hearing, they're going to come up with, oh, she's mad at me because I wouldn't let her, I saw her neck, and it's always going to be a sexual thing, guaranteed. Well, I saw her having sex in the back seat of the car, and she's afraid that I was going to tell her mother. I'm always yelling at her for sleeping with boys, and now she's getting back at me saying that I molested her. Yeah. So they kill two birds with one stone, right? They come up with a grudge. They come up with a motive to fabricate, and they also sully the victim's reputation. And you're not allowed in the civil courts or the criminal courts to talk about a victim's prior sexual behavior. Okay? Except once in a while, where there's constitutional implications. So it is, some judges will let it in, and some judges won't. I would ask the judge to, what they call sanitize that. I would ask the judge to say, all right, that's going to be his testimony? Well, we don't need to know what she was doing. He disciplined her a lot. She didn't follow rules. We don't need to hear that the rule she didn't follow was making out with boys in the car, okay? Because that is violating what they call the rape shield statute. Judge, and that all that's going to do is make her seem like a wild child, a sexualized child, and the jury doesn't need to hear that. They're gonna hold that against the child, and she doesn't deserve that under the rape shield law. Like I said, some judges I'm sorry, Del Russo, that's coming in. It's very relevant. It involves sexuality. He caught her just recently as 2 weeks ago, and that's what I'm told his testimony's going to be. And there's a direct causal connection. He can argue. I'm not saying it's true, Del Russo. What I am saying is, though, his testimony is going to be that 2 weeks before this allegation, he saw her in the back seat of the car having sexual relations with an older boy or a man, okay? And the jury needs to understand what it is that he disciplined her for, so he can make his argument that she made this whole thing up to get back at him. All right, Judge. I'll be back in an hour. I'm going to file my appeal. And the judge will say, you're not appealing. Sometimes they let you appeal right away. Sometimes they don't let you appeal till after the case is over. It depends. In any event, you get what I mean by lack of motive to fabricate, right? Okay. Mental state of the declarant. Declarant's a fancy word for the person saying something. And we're talking about here, the person saying something is the child, the interviewee, the person being interviewed. And that is kind of this one, display of motion, right? Emotion. So what the courts are saying is, look at the mental state of the child as she's saying what happens. There's not much to distinguish it between this display of emotion and mental state of declarant. Use of terminology unexpected of a child of similar age, again, is very similar to what? These, right? Idiosyncratic details, gestures, developmentally unusual sexual knowledge, right? So these are they're practically the same. Terminology unexpected. And interrogation and manipulation by adults. What is the last reliability factor is the opposite of what other reliability factor? See how good you are. If the court says, you know what, I'm not so sure this child's believable or that this interview is trustworthy. There was a lot of interrogation and manipulation by the adults. The adults were asking her all kinds of questions. The child was answering them. What's the opposite of that? Look on that chart there. What's the opposite of the adult is doing all the talking and all the interrogating? Spontaneity. Thank you. Very good. Yeah. That's kind of the opposite there. Spontaneity is the child's doing most of the talking and offering things spontaneously. What troubles the court is when the interviewer's doing all the jabbering. And the worst of it is manipulation. That is a deceitful, that is a real negative manipulation. That's a bad interviewer. That's somebody who needs to, has an ethical problem. And maybe they should have separate bullet points. I mean, interrogation is just a heavy-handed way of saying an assertive, aggressive interview. That's never good either, but it's not an ethical thing. It's just bad interviewing, And technically speaking, an interrogation is an accusatory interview, where you're accusing someone of something in the interview. in this context, the court's saying you're not accusing the child of anything, although you could, I guess. But you're jamming the information down the child's throat. You're forcing it on them. And Grandpa Cobb came in your room, didn't he? He comes in your room, and it was at night. It was dark out when he came up. Isn't that right? That kind of assertive, the interviewer does all the talking and simply gets the child to agree is the worst kind of interviewing there is. But if it's there, Now, you're not going to get that too much, if ever, from a forensic interviewer or from a child protection worker. You may get that from an amateur. Has someone in this class ever had a case where, especially now, I would say in the past 5 years, you'll probably see an increase in this kind of dynamic tenfold. And that is where the parent or the caregiver or someone who reports that the child made a disclosure does what with their smartphone? Records their interview, Have you had a case where they came in with the interview? Happens in family court when there's a battle and there's people you ever had one like that? When they recorded it?
When the parent alleged that a child drew a picture of the abuse.
Okay.
And when you looked at the picture, it was like, there's no way that this 5-year-old kid drew this elaborate picture.
Wow, that's unusual. Because you're saying the picture looked like an adult drew, somebody with great talent.
Yeah, artistic talent drew it. And we was just like,
that would be an interesting case, though, because I know what you would do and I would do. I would have the child draw something else in the interview. But I wouldn't I heard you went to the horse farm last week. I'm going to draw pictures of the riders of the horses. You draw the horse farm, and we'll see how good they draw. So these are the reliability analysis factors for your Learning Project 4. Any questions about that? So, think outside the box, as they say. Watch the video. Look for things there. There's going to be something in there. And again, it may be none of these reliability factors. You may look at them all and go, there's just something there that says it to me. I believed the child when, ... And that could be your own thing. Now, there's no such thing as intuition, okay? Take my word. There's no such thing as intuition in this context, in law enforcement. No, police intuition. Ain't no police intuition, okay? And it's not that cops who say that are bad or wrong or they're not good or they're not on to something. I'm sure they are, but if you sit down with them and go, tell me more about your intuition, they will point to an articulable thing that made them think that way. There's something that made them think that way. Just the way he said it when I walked in the room, well, what did he do? There's a way that you can express or articulate what it is that gave her or him the intuition. And if you feel intuition at some point when watching this video, write it down. Say when she did what? She stood up straight, she looked down, whatever it is. I don't know what it is. You guys do a lot of interviews. You may see something that none of these factors addressed that convinced you, that made your ear stand up a little. Oh, wait a minute. Feel free to rewind. Play it again. Play it again. I had a case as a homicide where the man, Akel Aki, murdered this baby, raped, sodomized, just a terrible, brutal case. Last case I handled before I retired. And he wound up pleading guilty, but I was preparing for trial on it, and there was a way that he expressed himself when he was describing what happened. He denied anything happened. He just said, I went in and the baby died. And I didn't know what happened before that. I was with my friend, we were smoking, went in, the baby was all right. All right, whatever. So the interviewer says, it was Detective Mellis, said something to him. He said, well, it's not like I went like this with her. Well, who the hell's, nobody said a word about shaking or moving your hands in that way, and it came out of clear blue. And then he kind of caught himself a little bit, but it was a little interesting little clip there. Now, I'm overstating. He didn't shake as much. For the record, I'm shaking rather vigorously back and forth, but he kind of moved his hands in a little bit of shaking manner there that I caught. I was like, that's interesting. I mean, why did he do that? I kind of nudged his hands back and forth. It's not like I did that. Unless he's an expert on shaking baby, You know, what will make him say that? One of the things, one of the strategies my detectives at the time that we would suggest to them, and it's better for sexual abuse cases with older kids or whatever, but they asked it anyway. The little girl passed. She was an infant. She was 16, 17 months old, and she died. And a detective asked this question, which we more often use in an incest case, where the uncle or the stepdad molests the stepdaughter. And we say to the suspect in the interrogation, if little Daniela came in the room right now, Kel, what would you say to her? Now, the expected response is, Daniela, I love you, but I don't know why you're saying these things on me. None of this stuff happened. But I love you to death. Whatever. Some manifestation of, why are you doing this to me? I love you. You're a good kid. Or even maybe some anger. I can't believe, you're making these things up against me or something like that. This guy goes, the detective says, was it Destiny? What would you do if Destiny walked in the room right now? What would you say to her? I'd say, what the fuck happened to you? I'm like, and if it went to trial, there was 4 or 5 things I was going to focus on in his. He didn't confess. In fact, at times he was persuasive. He was like, no, man, I didn't do it. He explained why. He was kind of, there were elements of that interview that the defense could have said, listen, this guy is an honest guy. He just doesn't know what to say. He didn't do it. He didn't know how it happened. He's asking the police, answering the police's question the best he can. There were elements of that interview that had some believability. So I was in the predicament of, although I could have argued that even though I put in some of the interrogation, the jury doesn't get to see the whole thing. But you don't always win with that. Sometimes the judge goes, listen, if you're putting some of it in, it's all going in. And then I'm like, so you got to make a decision. Remember, it's a denial. So there's a couple things happen. I'm going to put in his denial. I don't want the jury to see him denying. Because he doesn't have to testify. So if I put in his video, he gets a free pass. He doesn't testify. I put his damn testimony on, and I can't cross-examine him. So I had to ask myself, was there enough in there to play the video and for me to argue to the jury that it demonstrates guilt? It's kind of the opposite of reliability here. It's the unreliability analysis. And, there was that little shaking thing that I liked. There was this what the fuck happened to you? Like, who says that? What is that? How do you say that to your stepdaughter? A little girl you raised, you cuddled, you nurtured. That's how you approach her? It's ridiculous. And there were a few other idiosyncratic statements that the guy made. But the reason I brought this up is sometimes it ain't on the list. That's what I'm saying. It's just something. You may watch this little girl and say to yourself, well, that part was believable. Rewind it, right? And then articulate what it is that made your antenna go up and believe it, even if it ain't on the list. Does that make sense? Okay. So, I said I was going to be more limited than my video here, and I was more detailed. Nevertheless, I'm going to post this 53-minute explanation of the reliability factors on Write-In Learning Project 4. I'm going to post this recording, as well as my reliability tutorial, which is right here. Okay, that ends this segment. We were talking about reliability factors, and one of the reliability factors I neglected to mention was a statement against interest, or a statement against self-interest. And what I'm talking about here is if a child thinks they did something wrong, and many times children think that they were complicit, or the fact that they didn't complain, that's a big one, that they didn't tell right away that somehow they're culpable or did something bad or wrong, okay? Sometimes it's even more stark than that. One of the examples I use on the video tutorial you're going to watch is, and I might have mentioned this case in the past, was a little girl. She was about 7 or 8 years old. She was in the car with her stepfather up in Eastside Park in Patterson. The police rolled up on the car because the park was closed. Now, usually when they roll up in the park after it shut down in Eastside Park, could be someone using drugs. Very often it's a couple of boy and a girl making out, age appropriate. They're hooking up in the car. So they roll up, and before they can look in the window, they see a head pop up, and the car takes off. So there's a big chase. They wind up going through the Bunker Hill section of Patterson. The car drives right through the gates of a small factory back there. They were chained, and they were like 12 feet high. Car crashed right through them. Lock went flying. The chain went flying. Car does a 180, crashes into another fence. The man is injured driving the car. The little girl is somewhat injured, but not badly, and all kind of police descend upon the car. Stanford Wedderburn was the defendant. I prosecuted him a few years back. The little girl was interviewed by a patrol woman, and she said, "What was happening to you when you were in the park?" And she says, "I don't want to talk about it." She goes, "Well, we need to know what was happening. Tell me what happened." "Grandma's going to give me a whooping. Grandma's going to give me a whooping. I don't want to talk about it. Grandma's going to whoop me." "It's okay. Grandma's not going to whoop you. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything. Grandma's going to whoop me." "I'm telling you, Grandma's not going to." So eventually she tells. That is a classic statement against interest, right? If you think that by reporting what happened to you, you will get punished or something negative will occur, that doesn't mean it's 100% true and all children who make statements against interest are telling the truth and everyone else is a liar. No, it simply means that that's another factor you can point to, right? You can point to the judge or to the boss or your supervisor or to the jury or to the whoever, the DAG, that this child made a statement against interest, and that is something that you put on the reliability section of the chart. If you think that by telling something negative is going to happen, because people typically don't make up lies to get themselves in trouble, right? They usually make up lies to get themselves out of trouble. So if your perception is that you're in trouble for making the allegation, then you're more likely to be telling the truth. Again, doesn't mean you're telling the truth. It's simply something that you look at. We call that a statement against self-interest, and you include that in the list. It might even be on the list, and I skipped it. I'm not sure. But it is on my other narrative. And I'm going to show you an example of it now, which is why I tapped into my recognition memory.
Am I going to get in trouble for this?
No. Well, you're not in trouble with me.
I mean, if I tell you something?
If you tell me something, you're not going to get in trouble with me. Is that something that you're worried about? That you're going to get in trouble?
Yes.
Yeah? What makes you think that?
I don't know that my mom could be mad at me.
Your mom could be mad at you?
And that short clip you just heard was of a child who, just before she gives her narrative about being abused, expresses anxiety over getting in trouble. She thinks her mom's going to be mad at her, and she's quite concerned about that. So what she explains later about the abuse can be considered a statement against interest. People generally don't make up things or lie about things that are going to get them in trouble. They typically lie to avoid trouble. So that's an example of a statement against interest.